Welcome to another podcast of Edified Podcast. We have a very distinguished guest with us, Dr. Omar Javaid, and we'll go into a little bit more detail about his background and why he's with us. But before that, today in today's environment and today's podcast, we'll go to the core of the mission of Edified, which is to decolonize the mindset, decolonize the education, and reintroduce Islamic thought and reintroduce pre-colonial Islamic socioeconomic political models. So that's why we have Dr. Omar Javaid here. Dr. Omar Javaid is a very distinguished scholar. I would call him more of a thinker and a philosopher. He has a very deep eye on economics from a Islamic perspective. And when I say Islamic perspective, I'm just talking about like the traditional or the conventional Islamic finance and the Islamic banking system. He focuses a lot more on the pre-colonial Islamic socioeconomic political fabric that we had in Islamic societies. And he has a PhD in economics, and he probably did his PhD in this socioeconomic construct that we had in the pre-colonial Islamic models. He writes in journals. I think he's also in the process of writing his first book. So welcome. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you, Murbai, for joining.
Assalamu alaikum, Jazakallah. Thank you for having me as well. अच्छा, I would just call myself a student. ये आपने इतने बहुत बड़े-बड़े जो titles से मुझे नवाजा, scholar and everything, तो I don't consider myself any of that, because वो बंदा जो है ना हर वक्त learning के phase में ही होता है, and there are lots of things I'm not aware of. ठीक है, तो पहले से मैं disclaimer दे दूं ताकि लोग जो है बहुत expectation ना लगा लें.
So yeah. Umar bhai, let's try to keep it in English if possible, ताकि हमारे जो so that is that okay?
हाँ चलें, I'll try my best. I'll try my best, inshallah.
No, that's fine. We can do both. That's fine. The
Yeah.
reason I was saying in English is because it will have like a little bigger
Yeah,
audience.
it will have a wider audience, of course.
It
Yeah.
will have a wider audience, and it will also it will help us, I think, put our message out as well. And we can also do like Urdu is like, again, is the English is the hegemony of colonialization, right? So
Yeah.
it feeds right into our topic.
Decolonization in English language. You know?
Decolonization.
Let's decolonize while speaking English language.
Welcome to the reality.
Yeah.
I think like one of the main things is like we are so disconnected from our own knowledge base, our own epistemology, right?
Yeah.
And the big part of that is that we are so much disconnected with Arabic as well, because we have like 1400 years worth of literature where our scholars in Arabic and Farsi and Urdu and Turkish and other languages
Yeah.
have put so much effort and research work. I mean, this colonization or the introduction of the Western thought is not the first time it has happened in Islamic history. It had happened in the past. Imam Ghazali came, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal came, and they all put their part to it. But I think the unfortunate part is we are just not, certainly not taught in the traditional education systems about them, the conventional, the colonial education systems, if you will. So yes, welcome to the colonialism. Alrighty, so what do you want to talk about? Let's talk about colonization.
So there are, I think, lots of things that we can unpack. I mean, we can have like 10-hour discussion on, because it's such a vast topic, because colonization affects literally every aspect of our lives. From the way we dress, the way we evaluate, for example, where our society should be in the next 10, 15, 20 years, how it should get, where it should get, from the very idea of who we are to the way we see society, the way we describe what is good, what is bad, the way we approach knowledge, the way we govern, the way we describe, even oftentimes I notice the way we describe certain Islamic, purely Islamic concepts. In the last 300, 400 years, the meaning and core definition of those Islamic concepts has been, tainted by the colonial influence. And, if you read very classical scholars, then you might find a slightly different interpretation of different concepts. But when you read
Absolutely.
scholars during colonial era, even today, um, you'll find a slightly different understanding of certain concepts. This is quite prevalent in when it comes to institutions, for example. Um, Institutions like political and economic institutions. And this is quite blatantly visible when it comes to, for example, Islamic finance. For example, when it comes to Islamic education, we have lots of Islamic schools all over the country in Pakistan, for example, and other parts of the world. But just to briefly mention what's happening, we are using the same structure, same processes, same pedagogical methodologies, and expecting outcome to be somewhat different because we have
Absolutely.
chosen to teach curriculum which is a bit Islamic in nature. But
Absolutely
overall,
right. I think one of the things, sorry, didn't mean to
yeah,
interrupt you, but
yeah,
you bring a very important point of using the terminologies and having a different epistemological meaning of them. Islam has its, as you said, like one of the things we have done, unfortunately, is taken the Eurocentric uh, epistemological approach and the terminologies, and we have implemented that on our Islam and
yeah,
Islamic systems. And Islam has its own istilahat, like it has its own terminologies, which has their own nuances. They have their own
yeah,
meanings
exactly,
and the purposes. And we have
exactly.
somehow like totally, in this process of trying to, I guess there's this distinction between modernization and westernization or Euroization of what we are trying to do. So that is a very important topic. And you mentioned um, about social and economic system, but it's also very true in like what I've been trying to explain as well is it's also true in constitution. Islam never had a constitution, and people
Yeah,
have
exactly.
very big,
The
people. One of the things that happened after, because people talk about the, quote unquote, the Constitution of Medina, but it was never called Constitution. It was never called Dastur Medina. It was just called Mithaq Medina, which was a
yeah,
treaty. And after like colonization, it somehow became Dastur Medina and became the Constitution
yeah,
because this, the treaty with whether you call it a domestic treaty or international treaty or however you want to define it, the treaty in
yeah.
itself between the different tribes and the different nations or the different
Mm.
parties, that is a different thing, compared to uh eh, constitution we have, it's a European construct because they did not have any foundation to build a law, right? Because the kings, they would just make whatever law they wanted.
Yeah.
And
I mean,
then
how
and
do you
then
exactly come up with that constitution? The process is also quite disconnected from the way we would articulate laws and uh, you know develop governing structures in Islamic history. Uh, Today, I mean, if you look at the constitutional process, we have a very different kind of a system right now, which is typically, where either bureaucracy or the politicians they go make certain decision based on what exactly is they're interested in, and subsequently they uh, make a document out of it, and subsequently everybody's supposed to follow it. So we had a very different kind of approach that was used. For example, if you read Where Halak has articulated quite specifically how things used to happen. For example, uh, you have a specific qazi and a mufti in each area, and they would be very much well aware of the local customs and local challenges and local environment. And subsequently, they would prescribe rulings according to the social-cultural, personal, even personal uh, challenges that individuals are actually facing who are, coming to these jurists for, resolving their issues. So it had a very customized, tailored approach that we do not find in modern constitutional environment where, somebody from the top just impose stuff and everybody's supposed to follow it, irrespective of local differences and circumstances.
something very
So
similar to like the Dirka system we have in our tribal areas.
Yeah,
Something simple.
that is unfortunately more tilted toward tribal customs. But
Correct.
if you
Conceptualize it.
if you want to bring that to comply with Islamic standards, then it is much more easier to make jirga system closer to what Islam expects the system to be as compared to the colonial constitutional models that we have on
So
a
let's.
much larger scale.
I'm interested in about your journey. Like, how did you come about? Because I think you have a degree in engineering from NED University, right?
Uh,
And I
yeah,
think industrial engineering or mechanical engineering, I don't remember.
yeah, it
But just
was
like talk me
industrial
through
and
your journey.
manufacturing.
Like I'm like interested in like how somebody who's an engineer got into economics and then colonialism.
Yeah, it's a very long and a very personal kind of a story. I had a bachelor's in industrial and manufacturing engineering at first, and I went into engineering and did that, and subsequently I went into the industry and worked for a few companies for like 4 or 5 years. And during that time, I was also working on a magazine titled Critic Magazine. Um, and since I had a habit of reading stuff, I would read all kind of stuff. And I was doing MBA, and I was being exposed to economics and all of these things. And during one of the subjects of economics, I was confronted with this realization that none of the economic policies, whether you are going toward recession or you are going toward expansionary phase, whatever economic phase you're going through, the poor is not finding any kind of escape, because at one end he is um, bogged down by inflation, on the other hand he's bogged down by unemployment. So I was like, where exactly is the solution to that? And it
So
was
that's
kind
where
of
the engineer came in.
exactly, I had these kind of questions coming up when I was studying economics in my MBA program, and I did not have very good answers to those questions at that time. And it was kind of a coincidence. When I was doing this economics course, I found a book written by Michael Botham. The title of the book is The Merchants of, The Grip of Death. The
Grip
Grip
of
of
death.
Death
Okay. A
by
grip of death. Okay.
Grip of Death by Michael
Hmm.
Botham. And in that book, he exactly problematized the same problem that I was noticing while studying economics. And he said, okay, fine, these are the problems, and conventional economic models do not have a solution to this. And these are exactly the reason. He put a lot of blame on the banking system, for example.
Hmm.
And I was like, okay, fine. Why the hell I'm not studying all of these things in my formal curriculum? The more I read about these things, and the more questions I had, because
Hmm.
there was a ton of stuff which was available in literature outside the textbooks, but the textbooks were not talking about any of that, and they were giving us a very sanitized version that even would not allow or probably raise questions which were probably very obvious if you are a bit if you put some thought into that. So and when I started to read stuff, and things become more and more exposed, and I was like, the actual picture, the way economy runs and the society actually runs, is very different as compared to what is exactly being taught in the curriculums. And after a few years, probably after 7 8 years after my MBA, I came across this documentary by Adam Curtis. Adam Curtis made this documentary for BBC. And in the documentary, he explained how the disciplines of social sciences, from psychology to economics to sociology, in the last 50, 60 years, especially during the period of Cold War, were heavily funded by CIA, and they were used as a propaganda tool to counter communist ideologies. We
Hmm.
want really, and interestingly, all of that MBA curriculum was actually based on those theories of psychology and economics that were basically designed to counter the intellectual challenge that was coming from the communist or socialist um, thinkers at that particular time. So what we were studying basically in MBA was propaganda material in a nutshell. And nobody
Well,
was
isn't that what education is, right? Go ahead, please.
exactly.
Education has become like the first uh,
Uh,
tool of like
Propaganda, exactly.
mindset, right? I mean, that's where
Yeah,
everybody go from like from the kindergarten all the way to like, the more specialized
exactly.
we get, and the way the whole system is constructed, everybody's just focused on getting grades to go to the next level, to get a better
Yeah.
job, to get a better degree, and they're just giving them the answers that the instructors want. They're actually not doing any critical thinking within them, you know.
Absolutely. I mean, in education system, you basically get to know all of that stuff that helps you become a better component of the system. And oftentimes,
Absolutely.
much of that stuff is blatantly false.
Mhm.
Um, but that helps you, that frames your mind in a way that, makes you a useful component of the system. Therefore, you are actually taught all of that stuff.
Mhm.
Oftentimes, people have a very false understanding that after becoming educated, you are aware and you know how the world actually works. This is like further from the truth. If you want to understand how the world works, you have to do your own research. Literature is out there. There are authors, lots of authors, in fact, intellectuals and thinkers who have written a lot of stuff, but none of that will be taught in any other educational curriculum anywhere in any university. So you have
But
to
that
read.
is like with the sorry, go ahead. Like that is
Yeah,
the purpose of like our platform, right? Edified Education is to bring those things that are
yeah,
not being taught in any of these schools, which are like again critical, the pain points, and that is
exactly.
yeah, good. Sorry.
Yeah. So eventually, I had. The more I read, the more I had questions, and eventually, I was looking for uh, solutions to the problem that were being brought up by the literature. And eventually, I was introduced with the idea of Islamic finance and Islamic banking at that particular time, because uh, the people who I was I was interacting with at that time had this idea that since banking system is mother of lots of ills because of interest and everything, therefore Islamic banking and Islamic finance is ultimately the solution to lots of these problems and everything. And I was like, okay, fine, let me study that. And when I study all of that, and I was like, wow, I mean, they are also missing a lot of the stuff that they should have been looked into. For example, the structural component of the banking system that is basically partly responsible, significantly responsible, in fact, for lots of problems that it creates, uh, was not touched upon by any of the experts in Islamic economics. All the scholars were only talking about, okay, this is a transaction, there is an interest in this the terms and condition, are not problematic because of the interest factor, and subsequently we need to fix the transactions to make it Sharia compliant so that the bank does not is basically charging interest ultimately. But what they missed out was the instrument or the vehicle within which that transaction was being carried out, and how
Actually,
that instrument basically create an effect around that transaction, which has a ultimate effect on the overall economy.
I think Javed bhai, Omar bhai, just one
Yeah,
thing, just to add to that, I think their intention, because you have to understand like the conception or the
yeah,
inception of Islamic finance, quote unquote. See, one of the things is like even in like the traditional what we call Islamic seminaries or the madrasa systems, they
yeah,
are trained on legalities. Like what I mean by that, they're just trained as lawyers. They don't have any
yeah,
socioeconomic, political
yeah,
thought
exactly,
in there.
exactly.
And when I say lawyers, I do not mean the lawyers in the sense of like going into the court. I'm talking about like legal arguments. They're trained in legal arguments. And when this Islamic finance came in, the premises of that or the purpose of that was not to uh, reintroduce Islamic models. The purpose of that was how do we stay within the same system, within the same construct, and how do we
Yeah,
Islamify it? So so the intention was
um,
never
yeah.
there, and probably the knowledge was not there too. But the intention was certainly never there to kind of like reintroduce from like the Islamic models.
Um, I think I would go with this explanation that the proper knowledge was probably not there because they're not really experts of how Western systems actually function. And they have a very textbook based knowledge about what financial intermediation is all about. And subsequently, uh, the only thing problematic they actually saw was the transaction. The transaction had interest, and that transaction need to be, Sharia compliant. And that was the key area of their focus. And they were like, okay, if we fix this transaction, if we remove the most haram
Mm.
element from this whole system, then subsequently we will have a significantly better thing, because the rest of things are kind of subjective. This is something which is concrete, and we need to focus on this concrete area. The rest of the things will eventually take care of themselves. So whenever I listen to the scholars who have been, advocating Islamic finance, I realize that their understanding about the systemic and structural component is not sufficient. There's a lot they need to look into, and since they're not, fully being capable of, or probably not aware of what exactly is happening on a much bigger scale, therefore their focus is on only on the micro transaction, and then subsequently they're missing out quite a lot. I keep giving this example that if you want to convert a bus into a helicopter, um, would it be sufficient to place a pilot on the seat of the driver and put a fan on the top and expect the bus to start flying? I mean, this is the kind of, things that are actually happening in all of these institutions, which are, uh, restructured a little bit, but overall structure is more or less the same. You have a few things change inside of them, and now we have this Islamic alternative right now, and we are expecting it to do something which is drastically different from its original intended purpose.
I would not call it an Islamic alternative because it is not an Islamic alternative. It is like staying within the system, right?
Contemporary,
And
contemporary framework, and
applicate, yeah.
and you go to a restaurant, you have two options, whether you should have alcohol or you should have a Pepsi, or something like that, and you choose, okay, fine, let me have a soft drink, but soft drink is still not a healthier option still, but you're still in that culture, and that will
Mhm.
ultimately uh, yesterday, I went to a restaurant, and there was a guy who was giving you samples of locally made soft drink, and he offered me that drink, and I was like, "Astaghfirullah," and he was like, "No, no, this is not a foreign company, and supporting this country in the Middle East." And I was like, "What you are selling is poison." And he was like, "Okay, sir,
Mhm.
okay, sir." He did not argue with me, but I made the point there.
What do they call it? The
So,
tar soda or something like
yeah, it
that?
was a local variant. I don't know, some Cola Next, or I don't know what it is called.
Mhm.
But they don't realize that the whole formula itself is poison. It is still poison. You can make a local alternative of that, but the stuff that you are actually selling is poison. So that is the kind of issues we actually have. I mean, we can definitely go into specific details, okay, what exactly, because we are only talking in a very broader abstract sense right now.
Right.
Okay, we can go into
No, we
specific.
were talking about, your journey. So
How
I
you,
mean,
I was, yeah, we got distracted, yeah. So, um, I was uh, I was doing MBA, and I was reading a lot of stuff, and then I did eventually got interested in Islamic finance, and I did my master's in Islamic finance, ultimately Islamic finance and economics from another university.
Mhm.
And during that, since I
After
was
your MBA.
after my MBA, and since I was reading about structures, how institutions actually function. So I wrote a thesis. My master's thesis was about not the interest or the presence of interest or presence of other issues in the banking system. My thesis was about the structural issues that manipulates the money supply in a way that actually transfer it to the richer lot of the country, instead of redistributing it to the masses. And that's a pure structural issue. It's not an interest based problem.
Mhm.
By removing interest, you will still have this problem where distribution of wealth would be, concentrated in the hands of the few. It will not be distributed into
Right,
the.
because banking is essentially their product is this fake paper, right? Fiat currency. And they want to put that in the system, and that's what they want to sell. And they have, that's their, if you look at it, the business, and that is my point. Like a lot of these things that, capitalism is another,
Mm.
I call it a marketing term for the banking
Mm.
system because of the contemporary, you went a little bit, discussed a little bit about Adam Curtis and his work. But, as you mentioned, the banking system is designed in a way, the system is working the way it was supposed to design, right? Like it's behaving the way it was designed for, which is, take some money, create this some money, and I make everybody uh engage in this system of economics. Compared to, we talked about a little bit about a little about the ethics of economics and the morality of it. And if you look at historically, the only time there was economic equilibrium was in the Islamic time of Omar bin Abdul Aziz, right? Where people, they had zakah, but nobody wanted to take it. Like nobody was eligible to take it. That means there was an economic equilibrium. Everybody was, as far as Islamic right, it was rich. They had enough money. Like everybody had enough money that they would give zakat. Nobody was eligible for zakat. Just like a thought came in mind as you were talking. But
Yeah,
go
I
ahead,
mean,
please, with the
this
structural construct of
this is
your
this. I
MD.
think this has happened quite a lot in Islamic history. It wasn't just the time of Hazrat
Absolutely.
Abdul Basit, but and probably in Ottoman Empire also. But of course, we have seen lots of ups and downs in Islamic history also. So you'll find all kind of examples where
Right.
there is economic prosperity and there is very difficult economic conditions also. So I was talking about my thesis in Islamic finance, and during that thesis, I realized that since scholars talk about Musharakah and Mudarba being the Musharakah specifically being the ideal mode of finance, and looking at the structural problems in the financial sector, I realized that it is not possible for the banking system to, practice Musharakah because of the risk profile of that transaction. So the question which came into my mind and how Musharaka was very readily practiced in Islamic history. What was happening in Islamic history? How business was actually happening, or how finance was actually happening. That Musharaka was very common. So when I looked into that, and I found a very different kind of an economic model being
Model.
practiced in Islamic history, which was very different from the capitalist model that we have, where
Right.
financing is being done by specific institutions which we call banks or non-banking financial corporations, or financing was very much what do you call democratized. Democratized is not the right. Again, we have to decolonize our.
The colonial terminology,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
So, I mean, if you had money, you would find some neighbor or some relative, and you would invest, and you would do musharaka. There was no intermediary involved in this whole process. Individuals were directly interacting with each other in this sense in Islamic history. And I would, for example, if I have capital, I would find a neighbor, and that neighbor, um, let's suppose he wants to start a business, and he has the amount of capital he has is not sufficient enough, and I have some amount of capital, and I would say, okay, I know this guy. I am seeing this guy from since last 20 years, and he pray in the same masjid, and I know he's trustworthy, and eventually I would invest. So the problem of trust was already socially taken care of. It was the solution was in the kind of social environment that was already there, the neighborhood that was that you were living in, and so all of that created an environment where it was very easy to trust people. For example, if you live in a typical urban environment right now, um, almost everybody is stranger right now, um, and
Absolutely.
it is very difficult that people would stay at the same location for more than 5 years. Maybe more. Why? Because most of the people are paying rent, and oftentimes when the rents go up and down, they find some other place, and eventually they move out. So the concept of neighborhood in this kind of a scenario where very few people have own property, and most people are paying rent to. So the concept of neighborhood has disappeared. So you're literally living with more strangers and less people you are familiar with. So in this kind of a scenario, how do you trust people around? So it's very difficult to do that. So eventually, when you don't trust people around, so you rather want to uh, either keep your money to your own self, or you put it into a bank and subsequently expect the bank to invest it somewhere else.
Hmm.
So musharaka used to happen in Islamic history because the concept of neighborhood was very much alive. All right. So, and that was the very basis of economic reality that was, and that has now disappeared now
Hmm.
today. And the banking system cannot is not a fix to this problem. Banking system cannot bring in and subsequently create neighborhoods. Because the whole idea behind banking system is very different. Of course, it's not a institution to fix
Social construct, yeah.
social issues in the society. But when I looked for some local examples, I did find there are some communities in Pakistan who operate on a comparatively similar basis. And ultimately, that became the topic of my PhD thesis.
Hmm.
For example, if you look at the Memon community and Bohri community and Deliwala, and you have Chiniotis and you have Pathan and if you have Sindhis,
Hmm.
they have a kind of a culture which is similar to what used to be present before the colonial times. And you will find
Hmm.
people within these communities directly investing um, in people within the community. You have a friend, you have a relative who wants to start a business, you have some capital, and you are doing partnership with him, doing Musharakah, and moving forward with that.
And also, just to add to that, one more thing, Omar, right, is
Yeah.
we see that in entrepreneurs as well, right? You have a business and you take your son to your business as he was, say, like 14, 15 years old,
Yeah.
and he learns the business in the next 5, 6, 7 years. Then you give
Yeah.
him X amount of money, say, okay, here's your money, the business, go run it. I think that's also, like, as you mentioned, that like the part of your PhD thesis, right? Isn't it? Or
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things that we can learn from these communities, and unfortunately, these communities are also modernizing, and many things from their social reality is disappearing, unfortunately. And I keep talking, but whenever I get a chance to talk to the students who belong to respective communities, and I keep reminding them, oh, but you are literally losing probably the biggest asset that you had, an
which is a
intangible asset
community.
that you had, the community and the social trust that used to exist between people. Unfortunately, all of that is, going away because people
Hmm.
are becoming more materialistic. They are more focused on, buying expensive cars and, elevating the standard of living and uh, uh, the whole concept of neighborhood is not there anymore.
And also, I think one more thing is like their um, thought orientation is moving away from entrepreneurship and doing businesses, and rather they're getting into like different jobs and things of that nature.
Yeah, they
I think
they
that.
are opting for corporate careers in corporate environment. They're investing their money, they're buying property, and I think I
Mhm.
wouldn't blame them for doing this because the economic condition of the country has also been not very good since last 20 something years. So a lot of people were discouraged basically because of law. If you talk about Karachi, there was lots of law and order issues going on. So that discouraged lots of people, and they moved their capital out of the country as well, and bought property, for example, in Dubai. So a lot of that can be blamed on the overall macroeconomic conditions, but at the same time, those individuals who did have the resources, they became influenced by these modern consumer trends, and they're buying again expensive uh, houses in elite places in Karachi. They're part of that has to be done because uh, if your family is expanding, you need now extra space, and if you're living somewhere in Cody Garden, and you don't have that extra space in that particular area. So, but the concept of neighborhood, the way it used to exist, and the kind of trust these communities had within themselves is gradually coming down. And unfortunately, there is nobody there to remind them that they're losing something which has actually allowed them to survive for centuries, literally. Because wherever there is some kind of a economic recession going on, it is their mutual trust and support, this environment of mutual cooperation that actually help them remain afloat during difficult times. So that's a crisis in the making, I would say.
So that's how you got into like PhD, and that was your PhD
So that was
thesis.
my
But
PhD topic exactly. Yeah.
and then you also had some like classical Islamic education as well in fiqh and other topics
No, no,
from that
I
nature.
have
No.
I haven't read classical fiqh and everything. Um, my only
Hmm.
exposure to fiqh was during my master's program, where some teachers who were basically mufti, who
Hmm.
actually taught some courses related to Islamic finance and everything. So that was a very basic level introduction to all of that. Um, yeah. So mostly I've been studying institutions, systems. I've been studying the philosophical foundation of those systems.
Mm.
And if you fundamentally change the idea that justifies the existence of a particular institution, then what exactly happens on an institutional scale? So these are the things which I've been studying, and I've been exploring how things actually change when you shift the fundamental ideas from the Western to Islamic, then how fundamentally things change on a practical and institution level. So this is the
So
kind of
again,
study.
this is very interesting and very important because we have to, like, one of the things we strongly believe, or I strongly
Mhm.
believe in, or and is that we have to go to pre-colonial socio-economic and political models.
Mhm.
And one of the pain point that we have is that, visually speaking or conceptually speaking, we do not have those models anymore after, like, the Ottoman Caliphate, right?
Yeah,
After that, we do not have those models. And to conceptualize those models, of wakf and Baytul Mal. I mean, Islam never had, a central banking system. It had Baytul Mal. It had wakf. It did, it's when the mal was not only cash or gold or silver. It was, it was cattle. It was agriculture, like, food and things of that nature. It was everything. And, so,
yeah,
and I think one of the things that we have uh, constructed in our thought is that the wealth is only this cash, paper, right?
yeah,
But like the real wealth is, if you look at historically speaking, it was all about agriculture. Like that's why throughout history, the civilizations were built around the rivers because they could do fishing there, they could cultivate the land there, they could provide food, and then things of that nature, and uh, do, nurture cattle and things of that nature, right? So civilizations like classical Indus Valley, right? We go Mohenjo-daro, we go Harappa, and all of these valleys, they're like thousands of years old, but they've been on the banks of this river. And unfortunately, what has happened, you talk about real estate, a lot of our
yeah,
agricultural land has, unfortunately and stupidly,
yeah,
has been sold to these real estate,
yeah,
so the value of that land has actually, it is, we're talking about food costs and everything else. It will just go to that. So I think coming back to your first point, like these models that you're talking about, the socioeconomic and political models of the Islamic uh, construct or the Islamic philosophy are not taught in schools in the education system, which was your pain point, right? When we were studying in the schools, and that is like one of the purposes we want to do, inshallah, in our platform too, is to reintroduce and re-educate on these Islamic principles and the Islamic
yeah,
models. And that's where like experts like yourself, you know, they come in and contribute.
yeah. I mean, something that we need to realize in this sense, broadly speaking, is that in Islamic societies and history, a lot was done on an individual basis. I mean, it wasn't done by some authorities. The individual
Mm,
would do a lot of stuff that unfortunately has been outsourced right now to lots of institutions in
mm,
contemporary world. And when we institutionalize things, we often kill the spirit of it.
mm.
We remove that minute nuances that are oftentimes required when we are dealing with specific individuals. Because when you are an individual dealing with another individual, you customize your interaction depending upon the kind of challenge
Person.
each person is actually facing. For example, I write about this also, that this kind of very frequently happens. I go to this sabzi wala to buy some vegetables, and there are small street vendors uh, standing on the roadside, and oftentimes I don't have change or I don't have cash. I open my wallet. I don't have any cash, and the vendor would say, "No problem, sir. You can pay me tomorrow."
Tomorrow.
Or maybe, yeah. A couple of days back, I wanted to buy some bread and I did not have change. And the shop owner said, okay, no problem, you can pay later. You can just take the bread right now. The guy did not even knew me personally. All right. And I went back a couple of days later, and I paid the amount. But if you go to some superstore where you have an employee standing on the cash counter, and that
Hmm.
employee do not have the luxury to, facilitate me in the same manner.
Hmm.
So when you are interacting with individuals who have the authority to, make decisions, we create a very different kind of a social environment. But when most of this interaction is done when individuals are, kind of agents of different institutions, the whole
So,
dynamic actually changes.
so
Uh,
basically, from what you're trying, I think what I'm interpreting it is as from like being centralized, we have to decentralize it.
we have to decentralize it, exactly. We have to decentralize literally most of the things. There can, of
Hmm.
course, be some centralized. For example, even work was a very decentralized kind of a phenomena. You
Overarching, we could have like an overarching structure that kind of like monitors it and like have some boundaries around it, I guess.
it was non-existent, literally non-existent in Islamic history. It was not
Hmm.
even possible logistically. I mean, it was not even, for example, if you talk about Ottoman empires, it was a big place, and logistically, it was not possible for any centralized authority to, go and monitor and regulate and, fine tune whatever is happening in every nook and corner of the Ottoman Empire.
Hmm.
A lot was done. In fact, a significant amount of work was done by local people by themselves,
Hmm.
including the maintenance of the infrastructure,
Hmm.
including the creation of wakf. Well, wakf was literally a kind of a household phenomena kind of a thing. I mean, just like in our culture right now, we have this phenomenon called committee and BCs. A few
Hmm.
ladies would join hands and they would start, contributing a fixed amount every month, and they would share. So this is a kind of very decentralized, unstructured, informal
It,
thing that actually happens.
so just on that point, that is a very interesting way of doing investment, right, for a business. Like that's like, if you just talk about certain industries, like here, uh, we have some businesses, right? And what they do is again the same concept, BC committee, whatever, they pool the money
Yeah,
together. And
yeah,
every month they will say, okay, let's say there's 1,000 people, for
yeah,
example, theoretically, and everyone puts like $100, right? So
yeah,
every month there's $100,000. Everybody gets a hundred
yeah.
thousand dollars to invest
Absolutely.
into a business.
Yeah,
And
they can
that's,
do that.
and so that is another model of, I don't know, like, of generating investment,
Yeah. And
a
my
social
point is
construct.
it was done very informally by people themselves. There was no
Mm,
authority trying to regulate and everything. And the same was
mm,
happening with work as well. Work was also established by, like 10 people would join hands in a neighborhood, and when they would say, okay, fine, this is the property that we have and we're going to work for it for this particular cause. All right. And that would create a waqf ultimately in that particular place. And I was reading somewhere that approximately 30% of Ottoman agricultural land was dedicated to waqf. 30% is quite a lot if you talk about Ottoman Empire and their entire agricultural land. And you have, of course, other resources as well. So, and
so how would you like, so okay, just to think about it, the food, for example,
yeah,
Ottoman Empire was a big empire, right?
yeah,
Let's say hypothetically speaking, there's an empire from Pakistan to Egypt
yeah,
or Ethiopia or whatnot, right?
yeah,
How would the food distribution, let's say there's some kind of like flood here in Pakistan and all the
yeah,
agriculture is gone, right? But they have good agriculture, let's say in Egypt or in other places of the world.
yeah.
How would you redistribute that
Yeah, I mean, there would
without
be
a central organization, right?
uh,
Central.
the central organization was there to an extent. I'm not saying it was completely absent. It was there, but its role was limited. And of course, in these kind of catastrophic events where the whole regions are devastated, and we have another region that can actually support another region, then of course the centralized authority would eventually get involved. But during that particular time, I'm talking about the day-to-day, issues that
Mhm.
would require micromanagement of the resources and administrative stuff. That was done locally by the people themselves. But if you talk about the bigger macro issues, for example, protection of the land from any foreign aggressor, you know, so that kind of stuff was, of course, done by, because simply speaking, it was logistically impossible because the only medium of transport at that time was horses, and
Mhm.
sometimes it would take a couple of months to reach from one city to one end of the empire to another end of the empire. If you talk about the the capital to be in the Istanbul, and you are somewhere in the Egypt, then you can't have uh, the day-to-day affairs of Egypt being managed by somebody sitting in Istanbul.
Mhm.
It was a logistical impossibility at that time. The people had to manage their own affairs. The
And
the the Qazi and the work management and lots of this redistribution, the production of food and everything was very much locally managed in a very decentralized way. So this whole idea
so
of having this a very centralized authority that was going to manage everything is a very colonial idea again. We got this
mhm.
from colonial because in
Post-Westphalian,
time
right?
colonial time we
Post-Westphalian.
had the British Empire that was regulating everything. And if you talk about the Bolshevik or Russian Revolution in Russia, then again we had this idea of centralized authority, controlling everything. And I see lots of reformers in Pakistan also who are basically inspired by the socialist model as well. And they're like, okay, fine, we can have a centralized system that is going to have uh, the micromanage because
Everything.
and another problem with that is that you'll require a huge bureaucracy for that particular purpose. And the
Mm.
bureaucracy once created itself become a huge problem to manage in itself. I mean, in every if you quickly look at the history of bureaucracy all across the world, starting from China in the 2000 uh, BC, uh, bureaucracy ultimately becomes a kind of parasiting institution that try to control everything for its own advantage. And if you look at Islamic history, you don't find any significant presence of any bureaucracy to uh,
Mm.
collect taxes and redistribute them and manage the affairs of. Um, so it was done by the people themselves. And today, a lot can be done by people themselves, but we have this attitude of blaming government for literally everything. Um, for example, if you talk about garbage collection in the city and taking care of the sewerage infrastructure, for example, a lot can be even repairing of roads, for example. If you have a few potholes on the roads, then that can be very easily repaired by the neighborhood themselves. But we are like, okay, we're not going to do this. We are going to rather wait for the government to come and take care of all of these things. So we have this culture of mindset that some centralized authorities should come and take care of all of these micro things, and including education as well. We are expecting government to take care of the education, expecting the government to take care of the healthcare issues, and ultimately what happens that we hand over responsibility to a bureaucracy uh, that is very mechanical and ruthless and does not have any compassion or empathy by in its very design. Bureaucracy is
It is absent of the
like
human
machines.
agency, right? Yeah.
Bureaucracies are like machines, literally. You might have lots of people inside of them, of course, working for the bureaucracy, but essentially the whole bureaucracy acts like a machine.
Mhm.
So when you have a machine which is devoid of any empathy, so and
And of
it
human agency, yeah.
also does not have the capacity to understand individual requirement. It has like a fixed standard which it applies on every area and every individual. And when you have different people with different needs, different areas with different issues, and everything is being solved using the same approach, then ultimately we have a problem ultimately emerging as a result of that.
So the scenarios and the context is critical, right, in human agency, right? And
Human agency, yeah.
this,
I mean, this is what I mean. Islamic models cannot exist without empowering human agency and
hmm,
moral agency in particular, I would say. I mean, my
hmm.
last paper was about moral agency as well. It was published by Journal of Islamic Economics at King Abdulaziz University, Saudi Arabia. Um, and in which I actually explained how without empowering the moral agency of individuals, we cannot have a Islamic socio-economic model. We cannot simply hand
Hmm,
over responsibility to institutions and expect
hmm.
them to, do things for us.
So two questions.
Yeah.
One is, let's talk about inverse thinking, right? Let's imagine a society without banks.
Without
Banks,
banks. Okay.
okay, without banking, right? So, for example, I work at a company, right? Normally, they would like if in the pre-colonial, the pre-banking system, I would go there every day or every week or every month, and they will give
Yeah.
me a bag of coins, right?
Yeah.
Or my check, and that's my pay, and I'll take that. Now, even
Yeah.
this simple transaction has to go through the banks.
When you are which era you are referring to right now?
I'm just talking about like, just a regular paycheck, right? In the conventional system, like a pre-banking system, the paycheck was directly between the owner and the employee, right? Whether it was
Yeah.
daily or whatnot, right? But now,
Yeah.
even like though these two entities, an employer and the employee, they have to do a transaction through a bank.
To a bank. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, so like there's no direct, like, it is kind of like, how we have daily wages, right? You have come
Yeah.
you they come in, they do the work, you give them cash, that's the end of the story. Like, there's no banks involved. And
Yeah.
so we cannot think, I think, and again, we discussed this earlier during this discussion, that it is difficult for the whole society, especially because they're not educated in that, to conceptualize a society without banking or without banks.
I mean,
you
in
know, and
Pakistan, it is very much happening already. I mean, we have a huge informal sector in Pakistan. In fact, until 10 years ago, um, probably 90% of Pakistani Awam was not banked. I mean, they had no bank accounts at all. And you can go to Sadr and you can go to these areas called Kodi Garden, and you have these huge markets where most traders do not have bank accounts, literally. And they would
Mhm.
literally do transactions of millions of rupees every day. I mean, this is even happening right now, as we speak of this. So we have a huge informal economy that
So
already
what do they use? Like,
runs.
they use like a purchase system or something? Like, what do they do? Like, is it
I
like
mean, they're using cash. They're
an
using
accounts
they
barter?
might have this purchase system also. You have a receipt, and that is cashable at some later point in time. I don't know exactly.
That was sakka, right? That's what we used to call in Islam sakka,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
that's where the term check comes in,
Yeah,
right? What we
yeah,
today call the
exactly.
purchase system,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
right?
So this is already happening in Pakistan. I mean, this is not
Mhm.
something, probably this is not happening in the European and Western economies right now, but this is definitely happening in Pakistan because a lot of your economy, our economy in Pakistan is purely cash based.
Mhm.
And in fact, a huge percentage of population, probably 80% of people still use only cash for their transactions, and they're directly paying and buying stuff
I
using
think
cash.
it changed a little bit a few years ago, like was it 20, 30 years ago, when people like started going overseas, started like 30, 40 years ago, to Saudi and Dubai, and they
Yeah,
would send money
yeah,
from overseas to Pakistan. And I think that's where kind of like inflation in Pakistani's economy started. And then after like around like 2025, that especially when people from overseas, they saw an opportunity and they invested in real estate. That's where actually the real estate market in Pakistan kind of like went up, because there
yeah,
was not an internal finance. All the money was coming from overseas. And
yeah.
that kind of like created this synthetic economic
Artificial,
inflation.
artificial demand sort of, yeah. Artificial
Absolutely.
demand of real estate, yeah.
And that didn't exist. And and when we talk about economy, even in the older pre-colonial model, it was whether you call it, it was based on production. And what I mean by that, if you're a blacksmith, right, or if you're a goldsmith, you have
Yeah.
your jewelry, you're making a jewelry and you're selling that jewelry. If you're making your, swords and or if you're
Mm.
a cobbler, you're making shoes and you're selling those shoes.
Yeah.
And the skill set has uh, disappeared. Everybody in this real estate economy. And I think China, in that sense, is a good model for us, that in the past 30, 40 years, they have invested in the way their economy is. They have invested in developing this skill set in their whether that's a replica market or not. But the
Yeah.
point being is, they have enough people there who have. The consequence of that is that not only that they are self-reliant on skill set, but their economy is much more self-reliant as well.
Yeah. So self-reliance is, of course, is fundamentally necessary. And unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, in Pakistan, if you say we are to an extent self-reliant, except for if you talk about oil, we have to import that from other countries. But if you talk about agricultural products, so they're very much locally produced. Talk about water, we don't have to import it from somewhere else. Cement is manufactured locally. A lot of medicines are manufactured locally.
How about
Unfortunately,
steel and other things?
I'm sorry.
Steel
Sorry.
and iron, all that.
Yeah, we are lagging behind in steel industry significantly. That's an area we have ignored in the last 60, 70 years. Um, so a lot needs to be done in terms of, developing self-reliance in this sense. And this is fundamentally necessary also because, in fact, I was saying this in one of my earlier podcasts that the day Pakistan uh, borrowed money from IMF, that's like in 1950s, that was the day the ulama should have announced that it is prohibited for us to buy anything which is unnecessary from imports. We should not be
Right.
importing anything which is unnecessary, which is
It's
which
asraf, right?
is
The concept of asraf in Pakistan.
yeah, anything which
Islam.
is that our survival is not dependent on. We should not be purchasing that from abroad. Only the essential items that we do not have locally and which are without which our survival would not be that can be imported, but anything that is not non-essential should not happen. But there was no discussion. Only recently, Mufti Taqi Usmani Saab came and said that we should rather develop ourselves locally. I mean, after almost like 60 years. Um,
Yeah, and and
I
again,
mean,
like
now he's
Mufti
talking
Taqi Usmani
about that we should develop locally because he's realizing that we are too much dependent on international finance, and they have a very uh, heavy influence on our policies and including foreign policy, and we cannot really do anything without their permission. Now the realization is coming literally after 60 years, and
and
the
again, I think
realization
that
should
comes
have been
back to
there.
because Taqi Usmani Saab, he's the probably the founder of the Islamic finance and economics, right? And how about their thought in like has their thought changed about this whole economic system? Have you had discussions with him
I don't know. I
regarding
mean,
or
I'm not sure about it. I'm not sure
Mhm.
exactly about what's happening.
I'm talking
But
about like the Islamic finance perspective, right? Because Darul Ulum Karachi and is a big institution, and again Fakhur Madaris is a big institution, and Mufti Taqi Usmani Saab and his brothers and his uh, the likes his students, they're the ones who are running and will run off in the next foreseeable future.
yeah.
So the reorientation of the thought
Mm.
from Islamic perspective has to, I think, come from them. And if it comes through them, then we'll have a very quick and very uh, uh, turnaround.
Yeah. But they have to
They're
include
not
a lot of
educated,
things. They have to include a lot of things in their analysis for
right?
this purpose. Right now, their analysis or their focus is on many very micro issues. For example, the transactions, whether the terms and conditions of those transactions are Sharia compliant or not.
Same thing with the stock
Uh,
market. Like stock market had like
yeah,
we never had stock markets in Islamic economic systems.
yeah, absolutely.
You know,
Uh, so what they need to do is to look at the overall socio-economic, including political impact of these institutions. For example, what
Mm.
exactly is the political impact, or how the banking system, for example, redistribute power in the overall economy. Um, I mean, this should be part of the discussion. I mean, I don't know if any mufti or any scholar is actually looking at it. I mean, when you give so much power to a private institution to create money supply, and the institution eventually have a lot of power to influence a lot of things in the economy, Is it really allowed to give this much amount of power to a private entity to create most of the money supply in the economy? I mean, these kind of discussion are yet to happen.
And to your point, like even the state bank was privatized, right? Recently, right? In the past,
Um,
so
uh,
it was never,
tec-
it was never. Okay.
technically, it cannot be referred to as, but it is an independent entity now officially. The
Hmm.
government cannot dictate anything to state bank right now. It cannot be referred to
So,
as.
if it is not government, if it's not private, what is it?
Um, it is informally private. I mean, because for formal bankers, you'll find lots of formal bankers as senior employees in the state bank. So, um, but
And again, like the interest of the state bank is not necessarily the interest of a private entity, as you said, is not necessarily the interest of the society. And I think again, like coming back to the point that I wanted to make earlier is like having conceptualizing this society without these financial institutions, without the banks, without the stock markets. So I think, as you mentioned, in Pakistan and other countries, or it is um probably more feasible because the market is already like that. But like, let's look at the whole ummah, right? Like, not from Pakistan, but international
yeah,
transactions, right? International transaction. That is one of the
yeah.
key questions that,
Yeah, I
the
mean, we
the
can
the, the
have
on.
we already have money transfer uh, mechanisms. For example, we have Western Union that through which we transfer
Now I'm
money
talking
from
like from state to
to
state, right?
yeah. So and even today in Pakistan also, I think most of the people who are using banks are using it for transferring money. They're storing it and they're transferring money. Their primary aim is not to profit or make money out of the institution itself. And
So
those
in the older
institutions, yeah.
system where we do not have banks, how would we do this transaction?
We will have for example, um, I mean, this is like talking
More
about
like a purchase system?
um, we are talking three steps ahead. I mean, we need to
Okay.
start at the very foundation. There has to be a foundation first, and that foundation is the social order, the neighborhood environment, where it is possible for people to take care of their own finances. In fact, this is already done. This was probably done up until the last generation, where
Right.
all banks were already there, but people still choose not to put money in their banks, and instead they would rather, for example, if you have saving, you would buy gold or you would buy property, and you would invest, for example, in a business that your brother probably was trying to start, or maybe your neighbor was probably trying to start. You would not put it inside the bank. It's already happening in Pakistan. It probably is already happening in some parts of the society, not to that extent maybe, but it's already happening. So we need to have this social environment where people have this thing called social capital right now in sociology. We have this concept of
Okay.
social capital. Social capital means that people trust each other. They have this sense of belonging and cohesion. They support and they cooperate informally. If there is, you find somebody who's in trouble, you go forward and help them out in your community. And if you look at Memon, Deriwala, Chiniotis, you have this kind of a culture there until the previous
And also
generation.
in tribal in the Pathan culture as well, and
Yeah,
also
absolutely,
Blochi culture
absolutely,
and Blochi culture
absolutely,
as well.
absolutely. You have this is called social capital. And if this is diminishing in a society, then this is the first thing that we need to preserve.
So
All
like
right, the financial,
reintroduction of the tribal system, is that how would you put it?
not no, tribal system is a bit different, where you prioritize people of your tribe, even support them when they have done something wrong.
Okay.
This is when you have the
So this is
term tribe. So
okay.
this is definitely not what Islam talks about. Um,
Mhm.
but we're talking about this spirit of cooperation and
A community.
this integrity people should have, where if you
But
trust in
again,
somebody,
when you're
you
giving examples, right? You're giving examples of communities, right?
yeah,
Memon and Deliwalas
Deliwala,
and
yeah,
Boris, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
in the sense of the sense, they are a tribe, a super tribe, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, we can say that you have this concept of brotherly, and
Right.
if
But again,
Islamic
Islam does not
Islamic
prohibit it, right?
values,
Like you have to give zakat to the people closest to you, right? If you
yeah,
have to give zakat.
Islam allow you to identify yourself with your brotherly, but Islam does not allow you to prioritize your brotherly when, for example, there's a conflict going on and you have
Right, right,
a member of your brotherly against some other individual,
right.
and
But
your
that's a concept of justice, right? I mean,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly.